Ed forgot his focus really on what he was there to do. He turns up every day, and I'm saying to him, "We need to rip the engine out of that Corvette." He's going, "I don't need to do that. I'm a TV star." Yeah. He did some very bad things, and then when he did some very bad things, it meant that Discovery Channel just couldn't work with him anymore. So they gave him the option to leave, and he took it.
For more than 2 decades, Mike Brewer was the face of Wheeler Dealers, a show built on a simple idea: buy a car worth saving, fix what needed fixing, and sell it for a profit. That idea turned into one of the most successful automotive programs ever made, broadcast in more than 150 countries and eventually watched by more than 200 million people. The success, however, came with challenges that few viewers ever saw. There were disagreements that changed the direction of the show, a controversy that divided loyal fans, business setbacks that extended far beyond television, and difficult periods that Mike largely kept out of the public eye. Join us as we discuss what Mike Brewer revealed about Wheeler Dealers.
Hardest moment in my career is a bit of my career that I don't really want to get into and talk about, and it was the changeover between my TV hosts. That was a very difficult period of time, only because of the hate and vitriol. Right. I still suffer today because,
do you?
Yeah, because somebody decided to leave his job.
The success of Wheeler Dealers was never built on the cars alone. From the beginning, the show benefited from a partnership that gave viewers 2 very different perspectives on the same project. Mike Brewer brought years of experience from the motor trade, having spent much of his career buying and selling vehicles before he ever appeared on television. Standing alongside him was Ed China, a technically gifted engineer whose approach could not have been more different. Where Mike focused on finding the right car and making the numbers work, Ed focused on the mechanical side of the equation. His workshop segments quickly became one of the most popular parts of the program because they did more than show repairs being carried out. Ed had a way of breaking down complicated jobs into explanations that laymen could follow, which meant audiences were learning something while the restoration was taking place. That contrast turned out to be one of Wheeler Dealers' greatest strengths. Mike approached each project from the perspective of a dealer trying to make a smart purchase, while Ed approached it as an engineer determined to fix problems properly. One concentrated on the deal, the other concentrated on the work, and together they created a balance that viewers connected with almost immediately. As the series continued, the partnership between Mike and Ed became one of the program's defining strengths. The audience grew steadily, and before long, Wheeler Dealers was reaching viewers far beyond the United Kingdom. As production expanded across Europe, the team discovered that the appeal of the show crossed borders surprisingly well. The cars changed from country to country, but the satisfaction of finding a neglected vehicle and bringing it back to life was something audiences everywhere could understand. What had started as a simple motoring program was gradually becoming a global success. The moment Mike realized how far Wheeler Dealers had traveled came in 2014 at the SEMA show in Las Vegas. Discovery had invited him and Ed China to appear on stage, and what seemed like a routine appearance quickly turned into something neither man expected. When they arrived, thousands of people were already waiting. According to Mike, he initially assumed there must have been another attraction nearby because the crowd seemed far too large to be there for Wheeler Dealers. Only when they stepped onto the stage did the reality sink in. The people gathered there had come to see Wheeler Dealers. More than a decade after the program first appeared on television, it had developed a following large enough to fill part of one of the biggest automotive events in the world. For Mike, it was the first time he truly understood how much the show had grown beyond its original audience. By the end of the program's 13th series with Ed China, Wheeler Dealers was being broadcast in more than 150 territories and had accumulated an audience estimated at more than 200 million viewers worldwide.
What's the most you've made on a restoration?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say on my TV work, I bought a Austin Healey BJ7 that I bought in Oregon, and at the time I remember it was $35,000, and I said, that's a $70,000 car, nobody believed me, and we sold it for $75,000.
That success encouraged Discovery to pursue an even bigger opportunity. Believing the American market offered the show's next stage of growth, the network moved production to California. From a business perspective, the decision made sense. For Wheeler Dealers, however, it marked the beginning of a period that would change the program forever. The first public sign that something was wrong arrived in March 2017 when Ed China uploaded a video to his YouTube channel announcing that he was leaving Wheeler Dealers after 13 seasons.
Yes, I'm afraid it's true, and I'm really sorry. After 13 years of making Wheeler Dealers, I'm now going to be leaving the show.
For viewers who had spent years watching the partnership develop on screen, it felt as though one half of the program had suddenly vanished overnight. The explanation Ed provided immediately turned the departure into a major talking point among fans. According to him, changes introduced under Velocity, the American network responsible for the program at the time, would significantly reduce the amount of workshop content featured in future episodes. For many viewers, those repair segments were not simply part of the show. They were the reason they watched in the first place. Throughout his time on Wheeler Dealers, Ed had built a reputation for taking audiences through repairs with a level of detail rarely seen on television. He believed those workshop sections were what separated the program from countless other motoring shows, and he made it clear that reducing them would fundamentally change what Wheeler Dealers represented. Faced with a choice between accepting those changes or leaving, he chose to walk away. The reaction that followed was swift and, in some cases, far more extreme than anyone involved expected. A portion of the audience blamed Mike Brewer for Ed's departure, despite no evidence that he had made the decision himself. What began as criticism on social media soon escalated into something much uglier. Mike later revealed that he received threats, while abusive messages were directed at members of his family. According to him, the situation became so serious that strangers even appeared outside his home. As the backlash intensified, Ed felt compelled to address it publicly. In a second video, he urged viewers to stop targeting Mike and his family, making it clear that whatever disagreements existed behind the scenes, dragging relatives into the situation was completely unacceptable. It was an unusual moment, with one former presenter publicly asking fans to stop attacking the other. What made the situation more complicated was that the split was not solely about production decisions. Over time, both men would suggest that tensions had already been building long before Ed's departure became public. Mike later spoke about a working relationship that had become increasingly strained during the program's later years. From his perspective, Wheeler Dealers had provided Ed with a platform that helped establish his own independent profile, and once those opportunities existed outside the show, their professional paths naturally began moving in different directions. At one point, Mike's frustration spilled into public view when he posted a social media message describing Ed as a traitor. Although the post was quickly deleted, screenshots spread across the internet within minutes. For fans already searching for explanations, it appeared to confirm that the split involved more than a simple disagreement over production changes. In the months that followed, Mike repeatedly insisted that he had not forced Ed out of the program and had no authority to make that decision. He later described himself as shocked by the departure and disappointed by the way events unfolded. Whatever difficulties had existed behind the scenes, he had not expected the partnership that helped build Wheeler Dealers to end in such a public and bitter manner. Years later, the situation remained unresolved. Mike confirmed that he and Ed had not spoken since the split, and the friendship that many viewers believed they were watching on television had effectively come to an end. For a program built around the chemistry between two very different personalities, it marked the end of an era that many fans never expected to see. With Ed gone, Wheeler Dealers faced a problem that had no obvious solution. For 13 seasons, the show had been built around the partnership between Mike and Ed, and many viewers had come to see that partnership as an essential part of the show's identity. Replacing a mechanic was one thing. Replacing someone the audience had spent more than a decade watching and trusting was something else entirely. Whoever walked into the workshop next would inevitably be compared to one of the most recognizable figures in automotive television. The man chosen to take on that challenge was Ant Anstead. By the time Wheeler Dealers came calling, Ant was already familiar to motoring enthusiasts through his work on television and his background in vehicle restoration. He understood cars, he understood how television worked, and he had the kind of hands-on experience the program required. Even so, he knew exactly what he was stepping into. The audience was still coming to terms with Ed's departure, and for many viewers, the issue was never Ant's ability. The issue was that Ed had become such a popular part of the program that replacing him at all seemed impossible. Mike later revealed that Ant was hesitant when the opportunity was first presented to him. Stepping into Wheeler Dealers meant joining a TV show that was still dealing with the fallout from Ed's departure, and Ant was understandably wary of being seen as a replacement rather than being judged on his own merits. After several conversations with Mike and the production team, he eventually agreed to come aboard. It was not a small decision. To make it work, Ant relocated with his family from the United Kingdom to California, where Wheeler Dealers had established its new base of operations. As it turned out, the partnership worked far better than many people expected. Mike has spoken warmly about their years together, pointing out that they restored dozens of vehicles during the California era while the program continued to attract strong viewing figures around the world. Despite the controversy that surrounded the split, Wheeler Dealers remained one of Discovery's most successful automotive programs and continued reaching millions of viewers across multiple markets. The audience response, however, remained mixed. For many viewers, the issue extended beyond the absence of Ed China. The move to California had changed the character of the program itself. Wheeler Dealers had built its reputation in British workshops surrounded by the cars, roads, and automotive culture that many longtime viewers recognized from their own lives. California offered a completely different environment. The cars were different, the culture was different, and the atmosphere felt different. While international audiences generally embraced the American chapter of the show, many British viewers struggled to connect with it. Online forums and social media discussions are frequently filled with complaints from fans who feel Wheeler Dealers has drifted away from what originally made it special. Some were still angry about Ed's departure. Others simply missed the British identity that had defined the program for more than a decade. Mike has consistently maintained that the move was driven by Discovery rather than by him personally. The network saw enormous potential in the American market and believed relocating production would help the program continue growing. From a business perspective, the decision was understandable. Yet, for Mike, the criticism that followed became another challenge to manage during a period that was already proving difficult behind the scenes. By 2020, Wheeler Dealers was preparing for another major change. After 6 years in California, the decision was made to return production to the United Kingdom. Mike announced the move directly to viewers, explaining that the team had listened to years of feedback from fans asking when the program would come home. The return meant more than simply changing where it was filmed. It was also an opportunity to reconnect Wheeler Dealers with the audience that had supported it from the beginning. British workshops, British cars, and the familiar surroundings that had shaped the show's identity for years would once again become part of the formula. The move also marked the end of Ant Ansted's time on the program. By then, Ant had established roots in California and had personal commitments that made relocating back to Britain impractical. According to Mike, the decision was entirely amicable. There was no controversy or fallout. It was simply the result of two people finding themselves on different paths. The search for a new mechanic eventually led Mike to Mark Priestley, better known to motorsport fans as Elvis. Priestley arrived with a background unlike any previous Wheeler Dealers mechanic. Before making his debut on television, he had spent a decade working with the McLaren Formula One team, gaining experience at the highest level of motorsport and contributing to one of the most successful operations in racing. What impressed Mike most was not simply Elvis's technical knowledge, but the way he communicated it. Wheeler Dealers had always relied on mechanics who could explain complicated work in a way that ordinary viewers could understand. Elvis brought that ability along with a level of precision developed through years of working in Formula One. Mike has described the first test drive they shared as one of those moments when a decision becomes obvious. The chemistry felt natural, and it quickly became clear that Elvis could bring something fresh to the program without losing the educational element viewers valued. The audience responded positively. Returning to Britain helped reconnect the show with viewers who had felt disconnected during the California years, while Elvis brought his own personality and expertise to the workshop. The result was a renewed sense of momentum that carried Wheeler Dealers into its next chapter. That momentum eventually expanded beyond the traditional format. In 2024, Wheeler Dealers World Tour took Mike and Elvis across multiple countries, exploring different automotive cultures while maintaining the core principles that had made the program successful in the first place. More than 20 years after its debut, Wheeler Dealers remained in production, proving that the formula still had life left in it despite the challenges it had faced along the way. While viewers watched the drama surrounding Wheeler Dealers unfold on television, Mike was facing a very different challenge away from the cameras. For years, he had been building a substantial business operation alongside his television career, and by the mid-2000s, that operation had grown into something far larger than many fans realized. Mike Brewer Motors had been part of Mike's life since 2010. What started as a used car dealership in Sheffield gradually grew into a much larger operation, eventually spanning multiple sites and employing more than 60 members of staff. To customers, the business looked successful. Cars were moving off the forecourt, stock was constantly being refreshed, and the company had grown into one of Mike's biggest ventures outside of television. What many people never saw was how difficult it had become to sustain that growth. Expanding the business required significant borrowing, and every new site brought additional costs. Vehicles were regularly transported between locations, overheads continued to climb, and the company needed to sell hundreds of cars each month simply to maintain the scale it had reached. According to Mike, very little money was ever taken out of the business because most of it was reinvested into keeping the operation running. As the years passed, the dealership became increasingly difficult to manage. Revenue was coming in, but so were the expenses required to support a business of that size. The larger the operation became, the smaller the margin for error grew, leaving the company in a position where even relatively small increases in operating costs could have serious consequences. The situation finally reached a breaking point in 2025. Changes introduced in the Labor government's budget increased employer national insurance contributions across the country, adding another expense to an operation that was already carrying substantial costs. For a dealership employing more than 60 people, the impact was significant. When Mike later spoke about what happened, he was direct about where he believed the problem lay. In interviews, he argued that the additional employment costs pushed the business beyond what it could realistically sustain. The dealership had survived years of rising expenses and thin margins, but this was the point where the numbers no longer worked. After 15 years in operation, Mike Brewer Motors closed its doors. Around 60 members of staff were affected by the decision, bringing an end to a business that had consumed a considerable part of Mike's professional life. What had once been one of his most ambitious ventures outside television was suddenly gone. Rather than attempt to rebuild the same model, Mike took a different approach. His attention shifted to One Automotive in Warwick, a much smaller operation built around lessons learned from running a large dealership network. Unlike the Sheffield business, it carried no significant debt, operated with lower overheads, and was structured in a way that allowed Mike and his wife, Michelle, to maintain far greater control over its day-to-day operation. Looking back, Mike has been open about what the experience taught him. Growing a business creates opportunities, but it also increases exposure when costs begin moving in the wrong direction. The larger Mike Brewer Motors became, the harder it was to absorb those pressures. One Automotive represented a different philosophy altogether, prioritizing sustainability and control over rapid expansion. For most viewers, Wheeler Dealers remained the part of Mike Brewer's career they knew best. Away from the television cameras, however, the closure of the dealership was every bit as significant as the controversies that had surrounded the program itself. Yet even that setback was not the end of Mike's troubles in the motor trade. No doubt, Mike had spent decades buying and selling vehicles. He had negotiated thousands of deals, built successful businesses, and developed a reputation for spotting opportunities that others missed. Few people understood the trade better than Mike Brewer, which is precisely why what happened next caught so many people by surprise. Like many dealers, Mike understood that experience could reduce risk, but it could never remove it completely. In 2024, he learned that lesson the hard way when what appeared to be a routine vehicle sale turned into one of the most costly scams of his career. One of the incidents that reinforced that lesson involved a white Volkswagen Golf Mark 7 GTD sold through Mike's dealership. A buyer known to Mike only as Gary made contact and expressed interest, explaining that he was unable to come and view the car in person. The team processed the sale remotely, checking the buyer's card details and driving license, both of which matched and appeared completely legitimate. Gary then arranged for his own courier to collect the Golf. The handover went smoothly, and the sale appeared complete. It was only when Barclays contacted One Automotive shortly afterward that the full picture became clear. According to Mike, the buyer had used a stolen identity and fraudulent banking information to secure the car. By the time the deception was uncovered, the vehicle was gone and the payment had been reversed, leaving the dealership without either the money or the car. When Mike later spoke about the incident, he admitted that the fraud had been convincing enough to pass through the safeguards already in place. He described the experience as being scammed twice, first through the fraudulent purchase itself, and then through the financial consequences that followed once the payment was clawed back. Rather than keeping the incident private, Mike chose to speak openly about it as a warning to others in the industry. The schemes being used were no longer the crude scams that dealers had encountered years earlier. They were carefully constructed operations designed to imitate legitimate buyers and exploit weaknesses in modern verification systems. For someone who had spent decades buying and selling vehicles, the experience was a reminder that no amount of knowledge could guarantee protection from every threat. The methods may have changed since Mike first entered the trade, but the risks remained very real, even for people who had spent a lifetime learning how to spot a bad deal. While the fraud incident highlighted one of the challenges Mike faced in the modern motor trade, another significant change was taking place away from the dealership. For years, Mike had been building a personal car collection that reflected a lifetime spent in the automotive world. Some of the vehicles had been discovered during filming, others had been restored over many years, and several carried stories that made them especially difficult to part with. Like many collectors, he never set out with a specific number in mind. The collection simply grew over time as interesting cars appeared and opportunities presented themselves. By the early 2020s, however, the collection had reached a size that created a problem of its own. Owning the cars was one thing. Finding enough time to drive and enjoy them was another. Between television commitments, business responsibilities, public appearances, and family life, many of the vehicles were spending more time parked than they were on the road. The first significant sale came in 2021 when Mike offered several cars from his personal collection at auction. At the time, it sounded like a collector trimming down a garage that had become a little too crowded. As the years passed, however, it became clear that the 2021 sale was not an isolated decision. More cars followed, and what initially appeared to be a reduction gradually became a much larger sell-off. The full reasons only became clear later. Speaking on a podcast in January 2025, Mike explained that several factors had influenced the decision. One was a major house renovation project. He and his wife Michelle had purchased a property that required extensive work, and selling cars that were rarely being driven made more sense than taking on loans. The second was timing. After decades in the motor trade, Mike believed the classic car market had reached a particularly strong point and felt it was the right moment to sell while values remained high. Among the cars that left the collection was a 1976 Porsche 912e. Mike discovered the car while filming in North Carolina after a fan offered it for sale while trying to raise money ahead of a hospital stay. He brought the Porsche back to Britain, restored it, returned it to its original enamel blue finish, and put it back on the road. Eventually, it joined the growing list of vehicles leaving his collection, becoming another example of a car Mike had enjoyed owning but ultimately decided it was time to pass on. By the middle of the 2020s, Mike Brewer's life looked very different from the one viewers had first encountered when Wheeler Dealers began. The business he had spent years building was gone. Much of his personal car collection had been sold. The co-host who helped make the show famous had left, and the show itself had gone through one of the most turbulent periods in its history. Yet despite those changes, Mike's attitude towards cars, the motor trade, and Wheeler Dealers remained largely unchanged. After everything the years since 2017 had thrown at him, he still spoke about the trade with the same enthusiasm that had drawn him into it decades earlier. Away from television, Mike's involvement in the automotive world has remained extensive. He serves as chairman of the Coventry Transport Museum, acts as an ambassador for Ford Motor Company and GuardX, and supports a number of charitable organizations, including Seesaw, Sporting Bears Motor Club, and Ben. Mike has often said that his favorite part of the business remains the moment a customer collects a car they genuinely want. It is a simple part of the trade, but after decades of buying and selling vehicles, it remains the part he enjoys most. More than 20 years after Wheeler Dealers first appeared on television, Mike Brewer is still doing what he has always done: buying cars, talking about cars, and finding new ways to stay involved in the industry that built his career.